and the southern Kurils in Russia. And a general strike in Bangladesh is paralysing much of the country. Security forces are on a heightened state of alert. The opposition called for the action in protest over rising prices. They're also demanding early elections. Those are the headlines. The news continues after Empire.
A desperate act became a rallying cause.
And I'm here to fight for my freedom and for my country.
Social networks pursuing social justice, organizing countrywide demonstrations, igniting national uprisings, triggering revolutions. As the Egyptian regime implodes,
I will die on Egyptian soil.
we ask, who and what's next in the Arab world? This is Empire. Hello and welcome to Empire. I am Marwan Bishara. The Arabs' time have finally come. The lie has been exposed. Change is within reach. Forced to choose between despotic regimes and foreign interventions, between oppressive stagnation and the threat of religious tyranny, the Arabs in Tunisia, Egypt, and elsewhere have chosen freedom. Freedom of expression, freedom from want, freedom from false choices. Never has personal and national dignity been so intertwined, so mutually reinforcing, so inspiring. Never has a national transformation come so suddenly, the stakes been so high, people so daring. Across the Arab world, the message on the street is loud and clear. People want their long-standing autocratic governments to go now. From Tunisia to Algeria to Jordan, Yemen, and Egypt.
I have asked the government to resign, and I will appoint a new one starting tomorrow.
The trigger for all this? One man, Mohammed Bouazizi, a jobless university graduate. He set himself on fire to protest conditions that many Arab youth find themselves in. Unemployment, poverty, lack of opportunity. And where Bouazizi left off, social media and satellite television picked up.
A very large segment of the population is under the age of 25. These are people who are often unemployed, have very limited prospects for good jobs and a good life, are politically also, in a sense, castrated because of the authoritarian practices of the regime.
The 1980s saw a wave of popular unrest reshape the world. The Iron Curtain was torn down, and one by one, the dominoes of Eastern Europe fell. In Latin America, autocratic strongmen were swept away by democratic forces. But not in the Arab world, where dictators have been around for decades. The strongmen have ruled using Israel as a pretext, rallying national sentiment to gain legitimacy, and then invoking emergency powers to counter the threat of the Zionist aggression. But why do autocrats proliferate in the Arab world?
There's an argument that Islam is antithetical to democracy and democratic practices and institutions. There's another theory that says that oil wealth prevents democracy from emerging because the state is much too powerful and much too wealthy to make any concessions to the people.
The West says it supports regime change as a result of popular uprising, and yet backs dictators who do their bidding. But in the Arab world, there is another paradigm.
There's the fear that Islamists would come to power and that Islamists would be against the West.
So what's different about this wave of protests?
there are much more people involved. The mass basis of these protests is much wider, first and foremost. Secondly, the level of violence so far has been wider. Hopefully we're not there, but we could well be at the brink of civil war.
The West's reaction to the current demand for more democracy in the Arab world has been lukewarm at best and slow to come.
An orderly transition must begin now.
In spite of that, Arab leaders are reacting and talking reform. Jordan's King Abdullah has sacked his entire government, and Yemeni President Ali Abdullah Saleh announced that he would quit at the end of his term in 2013.
There's no extension, no inheritance, no resetting the clock, as some have repeatedly claimed.
But the question is this enough? Joining me to discuss this breathtaking transformation sweeping the Arab world are Professor Rashid Khalidi. You're a professor of modern Arab studies at Columbia University and author of Sowing Crisis, the Cold War and American Dominance in the Middle East. Clovis Maqsood, you're a professor of international relations and director of the Center of the Global South at the American University in Washington, D.C., former chief representative of the League of Arab States to the United States and the United Nations, author of numerous books, including The Crisis of the Arab Left. Samer Shahata, you're a professor of Arab politics at the Center for Contemporary Arab Studies at Georgetown University, author of Shop Floor Culture and Politics in Egypt. Gentlemen, welcome to Empire. I'm going to start with you, Ambassador Maqsood. It's been 6 weeks since Bouaziz set himself on fire. An event and 6 weeks that shook the world, but will they transform the region?
What we have is Arab unity and Arab fragmentation. Arab fragmentation on the top and Arab unity on the bottom. So what happened in Tunisia more or less expedited the transformative factor and the breakthrough in Egypt.
So you think there is no turning back?
I don't think it's irreversible.
Professor Khalidi, put this for us in a historical perspective. The Arab world has been in stagnation now for 3 decades. Since bin Ali took over in 1987, before him Ali Abdullah Saleh of Yemen in 1978, this region has seen no change, certainly not in Egypt. How do you see this transformation in historical perspective?
I think what we're seeing now is a breakup, somewhat similar to what happened immediately after World War I, when you had Woodrow Wilson, the idea of self-determination, and suddenly all over the Arab world there were revolts, there were uprisings, which had the same kind of demands for liberal constitutional forms, an end to external control, greater social justice. Even with a repressive police state, such as has been in place in Egypt for decades, Egypt has a sort of cultural radiance. And when Egypt shakes, as it's shaking now, the entire Arab world feels it. Egypt is the most important country in the Arab world. It's the biggest, it's the intellectual center, it's the media center.
Samer, we've seen that succeed already in Tunisia. It looks like the Mubarak regime is imploding. Are you optimistic about change in Egypt?
Yes, certainly, and sometimes no. But I think that the point of the transformation is certainly already occurring. There's no question about that. Whether the regime continues in one form or another for a week, for a month, until the elections in 2011, or even longer, there's certainly been a transformation in Egypt, and it's been a radical one. We have not seen, and correct me if I'm wrong, this number of protesters all across the country in Egypt protesting and politically aware. That is, these are not, labor protests. These are not protests about inflation and so on, with one goal since 1919. Unfortunately, however, I think, authoritarian regimes sometimes manage to get through crises in one way or another, sometimes transformed. So I think the question now is to what extent what we're seeing will be structurally transformative of the Egyptian political system. And it's not clear that it will necessarily lead to a democratic political system. We have to be hopeful, and I think people have to continue struggling, but that's not certainly determined.
So we know there is a break with the past, but we don't know how they will define the future. But before we do that, Professor Maqsood, we're all surprising ourselves. It seems Egyptians themselves are being surprised by what they are doing themselves. I mean, where is Ayman Zawahiri? Where is Al-Qaeda now? Where is the so-called Islamic fundamentalist jihadists and so on and so forth? Where has this Arab street been? It's like as if it's been invisible, and all of a sudden it's shocking itself and the rest of the world.
What you are experiencing is that this very peaceful and enlightened and spontaneous mobilization that has taken place all over Egypt, had on Thursday, unfortunately last week, the baptism in blood. This, paradoxically, is going to cement further the will and the determination to undertake a liberal Arab nationalist with a cognizance that Islam has to be coping